Hey everybody, Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, Patriots Beat live podcast here on this rainy Tuesday night. And Alex, we are going to take questions here tonight from all of you viewers out there. So please drop your questions in the chat. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can. But as people trickle in here, Alex, and start asking some of these questions, let's start with the Stephon Gilmore latest and update on the Stephon Gilmore situation. Mike Giardi of NFL Network confirming that Stephon Gilmore is indeed in town in the New England area, not necessarily to report to the team, but at least he's in Boston, Foxborough, wherever you want to call it, and is in the state of Massachusetts. And on top of that, on Saturday, and this is what I really wanted to get to, is Mike Reese's Sunday notes, which are obviously must read for everybody. But he kind of painted a positive light, I would say, on the situation, just saying that he doesn't sense any animosity or any ill will for Stephon Gilmore towards the team or vice versa. And he also said that, quote, he seems to enjoy being a Patriot, is open to sticking around, and this was his least expensive but most decisive way of sparking more productive contract talks with the team so he can feel better about being a part of New England's present and future. So Mike is of the ilk that thinks that this isn't, there's no burned bridge here. This is something that could definitely come back and be positive for the Patriots in terms of Stephon Gilmore sticking around. He's in the Boston area. It does feel like this has a resolution if the Patriots and Stephon Gilmore want to find it.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this before, how important Gilmore is to the Patriots this year. And I don't know that the Patriots can afford to not find common ground. I don't know that they can afford to test him and call his bluff and not bring him back. They need him if they want to compete this year. He's arguably the most important player on the team, what he means for the defense. The depth at the cornerback position is not what it has been the last 2 or 3 years. They need him back. They have to figure out a way to get him back, and I think he knows that.
Yeah, I think that he has all the leverage in the world right now. And Stephon Gilmore is looking at this roster and saying, look, J.C. Jackson's a nice 1B right now to me. Is he a true number one guy that can shut down his matchup every single week and basically let you play 10 on 10, right, on the other right. Players on the roster or whatever you want to call it, and just say, Stephon Gilmore's got Stephon Diggs this week. Everybody else worry about everyone else, right? You know, that sort of thing. And the game planning situation for the Patriots is always, they get to Wednesday and they say, Stephon Gilmore, you have this guy. This is what we're going to do against everybody else on the offensive side of the football. And this sort of goes back to like even Ty Law or Darrelle Revis or other shutdown corners that the Patriots have had that have allowed them to play like that and allow them to be aggressive and play a lot of cover one, knowing that they didn't have to roll that safety in that direction or play with 2 deep safeties to protect over the top. So many schematic advantages to having Stephon Gilmore on the Patriots roster. And it does sound like the contract resolution does exist. Like there is a path to getting this done. The comp that we keep on hearing is that Darius Slay contract, that 3 for $16 million per year, somewhere around $50.5 million over the entire life of the contract if it reaches all of its incentives and stuff like that, total value. About $26 million guaranteed. I think that's maybe a little bit rich for a player of his age, but somewhere in that $14 to $16 million range if we're talking extension. But I do think the interesting question on top of the extension question is, what do they do if it's just a short-term solution in terms of, like last year, how they gave him a little bit of a salary bump, right? How far do you go if you're just looking to get him back in the building for 2021?
I mean, I think that has to be an option because it's better than not getting him back at all. And I would argue a 1-year deal is better than, say, a 4 or 5 year deal, just given his age. You know, you'll have cap space next year, and it projects to be a strong cornerback class. We'll see how much that actually happens. You don't know who's going to sign extensions, et cetera, but it looks to be a strong cornerback class next year. So you have that in play. You can dip back to the draft again. I think you need to worry about this year. And it's a long-term need one way or the other, right? Gilmore coming back, not coming back doesn't change much. If you lose J.C. Jackson, it certainly becomes even more pressing, but I don't think that they can necessarily look at it in terms of, well, you know, and I know they like to take the 5-year approach. You can't do that here. You need to do what's best for the team right now, and then you figure it out down the road.
Yeah, the uncharacteristically aggressive offseason goes up in flames if Stephon Gilmore is not on the Patriots, right?
Yes.
It feels like he is the missing piece. He is the last piece of the puzzle that wasn't out there at minicamp. It feels like needs to be out there. How about this question though? We can kind of start some of these questions again. If you have questions, this is a live Q&A edition of the show, so please drop them in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as we possibly can. I'll just, this is more of a take than a question, but we can spin it into a question. What about JC Jackson's long-term future with the Patriots? Because it does feel, I think JC Jackson has proven to be a little bit of a better player than Malcolm Butler, but it does feel a little bit like the Malcolm Butler situation where you don't want to overpay Jackson. You don't want to, just because you found him as an undrafted gem, you don't want to pay that, right? You want to make sure you're paying the production. But what does a long-term plan with JC Jackson here in New England look like? A contract, what does that look like? And would you be open to having him stick around if he's going to get 14 to 16 million, that kind of CB1 type of money?
Yeah, I would. And I don't hate this plan, right? If Jackson becomes your new number one and then you draft somebody top 60 pick, that guy becomes your number 2 corner. Maybe Juwan Williams even turns the corner, becomes your number 2. The guy you draft becomes your number 3. There's a number of ways to go with it. And this is a cop-out here, but so much of it is going to depend on, I think, how he plays this year. I think they want to see what he does this year, what he looks like, before they make any long-term commitment to him. If he has another strong year, if he's a top 20 corner in football again, which I think he was last year, then they're going to pay him like one. If he takes a step back, then I think that they would rather go in with all that extra money, and they'll have a lot of extra money and find 2 new corners instead of 1 between free agency and the draft. I will address real quick, just it's a follow-up to this question, Evan, if you can find it in the chat, from King Wally, whatever that says. I apologize if I got that wrong. What about Jonathan Jones? So, just to clarify, because I've seen this too, people say, why do they need another second corner? They've got Jonathan Jones. He's very good. Jonathan Jones is a very, very good player. One of their best finds at corner. That extension he signed 2 years ago is a great, great freaking deal by this team. He's a slot corner. That's what he does. That's his role. When we talk about this with Gilmore and Jackson and Jason McCourty and Juwan Williams and that whole conversation, we are talking about outside corners. I don't know that you're playing Jonathan Jones on the outside. I just don't think that's putting him to his strengths. I don't think that's the best use of him if he's going to be on the team. I think he's your number 1 slot corner. He is a number 1 slot corner. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't move him from that spot.
Yeah, Jonathan Jones is slot corner, absolutely. So we're talking about outside corners, not inside corners. I do see a lot of people saying that we forget about Jonathan Jones in this conversation. No one's forgetting about Jonathan Jones, just a different position. I want to bring it back to JC Jackson, though, quickly, and just talk about, I think JC Jackson, from everything that he has said, now some of the ball hawk stuff, maybe not so much. I think that's a little bit too Asante Samuel if JC Jackson wants to get paid by the Patriots. But the one thing that he continuously says and backs it up with his participation in the offseason program is this is a player that absolutely loves to practice. He loves practice, and he works hard at his craft behind the scenes. And when the cameras aren't there, he was out there this spring at OTAs and at minicamp, but even at voluntary workouts too. He was out there for most of those. So for a player that is playing right now on a restricted free agent tender because he went undrafted, and it is a pay bump, but it's nowhere near his market value. He showed up in the spring to go to voluntary workouts and is out there working on his craft. He's not trying to hold out. He's not saying that Stephon Gilmore, what he's doing is wrong, but just from JC Jackson's perspective only, he is out there working on his craft. He is practicing with the team in the off season in these voluntary workouts. He talked about it a lot last season, how he just loves to practice, loves to play football, even in practice or in a game. And those types of guys that put in that kind of effort, that do the right thing for the team, that don't care necessarily about their contract. Because JC Jackson very well could sit back and say, hey, I had 8 interceptions last year. You're paying me, what, $3 million, I think it is, on his restricted free agent tender right now. I want more money, right? I deserve more money. I can earn more money. Instead, he is looking to cash in terms of betting on himself and going out there and having another big year and then worrying about his money next offseason. So he's taking the right approach to get paid by the Patriots. And I think guys in the past at that cornerback position that haven't gotten paid, not all of them, Darrelle Revis, Aqib Talib, those guys just got big money elsewhere that the Patriots are never going to match. But talking about Asante Samuel, for example, who I do think has a little bit of sort of a comp for J.C. Jackson in terms of playing style. Both those guys do like to hunt the football a little bit, play a little bit more off and press man coverage to sort of hunt those interceptions and ball hawk, as Jackson would call it. I think Asante Samuel overstayed his welcome because of his attitude. Right. And if J.C. Jackson continues to have this type of positive attitude, then I think that I think the Patriots will be open to paying him. And I think that should be a good thing for everybody, is that Jackson really fits this system as a man coverage corner. He plays the way that they want him to play, physical, good ball skills, all that type of stuff. And then on top of that, practices hard, shows up, participates, does all the right things behind the scenes. I think he's a Patriot type of player, and I wouldn't be surprised if they paid him. So maybe that is what we're looking at, is a Stephon Gilmore sort of signing getting a little bit of a bonus or getting a little bit of a raise for this 2021 season. The Patriots paying J.C. Jackson next offseason, moving on from Gilmore, drafting somebody. Exactly what we thought that they were going to do this offseason, Alex. Maybe it just all kind of comes to fruition next offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that makes more sense, right? We talked about this during the draft, that there wasn't necessarily the opportunity there for them to take that corner. Maybe in the first round if they don't take Mac Jones, but they needed a quarterback. That was the right pick. And then you just saw this massive run on corners. They trade up to get Barmore, who they really liked. And then by the time they're on the clock again at 96, I mean, the cornerback tree had really been picked clean. There weren't a lot of guys left. Guys went way above where they were supposed to go. So, and it wasn't necessarily a strong year for cornerbacks in free agency either. This wasn't the year to need a cornerback. And they, at least to this point, they made sure that they didn't need a cornerback, at least like really instantly need a cornerback this year. So I think that, when we go into next year, we've talked about this plenty. We'll talk about it more when we get to next offseason. Cornerback and tackle, those are the positions. That's what we're going to be talking about. Those are two things that they maybe kind of pushed to the back burner, got short-term fixes for this offseason that we'll talk about as potential long-term needs next year.
Yeah, once they lost out on Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn, it felt a little bit difficult. Who are you going to take at 15 at corner? Probably nobody, right? And that sort of gap, I think, between those top two guys and the rest of the cornerback class this year was pretty wide. So I can sort of understand why they didn't go corner in the top 50, especially after they make, like you said, the Mac Jones pick. It really just doesn't make sense after that to go and get somebody that might not be exactly a scheme fit or has some injury concerns like some of the guys that went after that, things of that nature. Sticking to the cornerback pass defense conversation, this is an interesting question just in terms of playing more zone coverage. If they were to move on from Gilmore, trade him, whatever, the case may be because of the contract dispute, could they play more zone? I mean, Bill Belichick's not a zone guy, right? They sprinkle in everything, but they are notoriously year in and year out one of the most man-heavy defenses in the NFL. Now, what does that mean? That usually means about 55-60% of their snaps are in man coverage, which means 40% of their snaps are in zone. So it's not like we're talking about 80-20 split here of man versus zone, but they do have a better pass rush. They can run some blitz zone schemes and things like that instead of just man blitz schemes. But in terms of playing more zone, do you like that idea, Alex, if they don't have Stephon Gilmore to kind of protect their secondary a little bit more? We've seen the bend don't break stuff a little bit in the past when their secondaries have been a little weaker.
I think that if they were to go this route, right, like Cloven's suggesting here, I think you get heavily into bend don't break, because I think if you want to play zone the way they want to play zone, you need that second deep safety, right? You need that Deron Harmon, and they don't have that guy right now. And maybe it's Miles Bryant, who I know you kind of did a little film on today and who you've been impressed with. And, maybe they moved Juwan Williams back there. Maybe it's Duggar. Mills. Right. So Duggar, I'm not saying that guy, I'm not saying they can't do it. They just, that guy's not obviously identified right now. Maybe it's Adrian Colbert if he makes the team. But, if not, you're going to be playing a lot of kind of deep cover 3-ish looks, and then that just turns into getting nickel and dimed underneath, especially if they want to be blitzing. So they might have to do this if they don't have Gilmore, honestly, or some sort of match where you're using JC Jackson in man and then the rest of it's zone. But I don't know that they have the personnel to necessarily be a zone heavy team right now.
Yeah, so the Patriots don't play a ton of split zone, right? They play some cover 2 every once in a while. They'll throw that in there, especially against really heavy RPO teams on first and second down. Like when they play Kansas City, for example, they play a lot of 2 deep, cover 2. But when they get into some of those teams, for the most part, Bill Belichick likes to play with an extra guy in the box, right? That's I think the basis of everything that they do defensively, and the reason why they play so much cover 1 man, I think is actually starts with the run game with Bill. I think he wants that extra defender in the box. I think that's more important to him than having the extra defender deep, not only because it helps you fit the run, but also because you can use that player as a blitzer. You can use that player as a rat or a robber in the middle of the defense at the intermediate level to cut crossing routes and read the quarterback and do other different things like that. Cover 1 rat or cover 1 robber is Bill Belichick and Nick Saban's bread and butter. They both love it to death. That's their coverage. Now, the other coverage that they like to play, though, the Patriots and Alabama's Ripley's match, which is cover 3 match. Now, cover 3 in other places, like, for example, Seattle, although they do have some match stuff, for the most part, cover 3 in Seattle spot drop, right? You're just dropping into an area of the field. With the Patriots, cover 3 can sometimes become a match coverage where the guys on the outside in particular, even the guys in the slot, if your receiver that you're over, right, runs a vertical route and doesn't break within the first, I think usually it's about 8 yards to the line of scrimmage is their principles, then they match it, right? If it's a go ball, if it's a post, if it's a deep over, if it's anything that's like up the field, for the most part, the Patriots will match that, whether it's man or zone coverage. So a lot of their zone is actually man principles, and a lot of their cover 2 is like cover 5 or 5 cougar, which are like trap coverages. That like I need a whiteboard to explain some of that stuff. But for the most part, what you're getting into is like they're not really playing true spot drop zone too often, where they're just dropping into an area and 5 under 2 deep cover 2. Like that doesn't really exist too much in Bill Belichick's world, right? So I don't know how much zone they would actually truly play. I mean, it would definitely be a different approach, and they did play some more zone, I would say, last year than the year before that, when they had the boogeymen, all the linebackers, and they were able to blitz people and stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't believe that Bill Belichick will ever be a true proponent of spot drop zone ever. I think it's too basic of a coverage for him, and I think he knows that these NFL quarterbacks, like if you start spot dropping against Patrick Mahomes and Buffalo and Deshaun Watson and all these great quarterbacks, they're going to pick you apart, right? They're just going to sit there and pick you apart. So I think he knows that that's the easier way to go in terms of what quarterbacks go up against. I mean, he can just like ask Tom Brady all over the years for 20 years, like, what would you rather face? And I guarantee you Brady would say, I'd rather face zone than man. So I think that's a little too easy for Bill's liking. Talking a little bit more about defensive philosophy here and just the coaching and stuff like that. What's the plan with Steve Belichick? Because Bill Belichick confirmed finally last year during the season, kind of backdoor confirmed at least, that Steve was calling plays on the defensive side of the football. We know Bill is overseeing everything that Steve is doing. We know they're going in with a game plan with sort of a set of plays that they're going to call. So it's not like he's just like in the Rolodex every single week, like picking things out of the hat, right? They have a set plan in place, and Bill's in his ear too to make sure that they're calling the right stuff. But is Steve Belichick ever going to get that defensive coordinator title? And like Ann says here, does it even matter if he's called the defensive coordinator or not?
It doesn't. I mean, financially, it might, is kind of where that comes in. But I don't, is Steve Belichick going to go to Bill and say, if you don't pay me, old man, I'm going elsewhere? Like, I don't see that happening. And I don't think it's a thing where, the other thing would be if you don't give him the title, sometimes in these situations, if you don't give him the title, somebody else will. Does another team have the balls to try to hire Bill Belichick's son away from him? I don't think so.
Right.
So they're kind of in a spot. I think, what ties in here is how bad do you want to keep Gerard Mayo around? And you're not going to be able to keep him around forever, but he's a guy who other teams certainly are going to look at. Was it the Eagles, right, who interviewed him for a head coaching job? He's never even been a coordinator. He was a linebackers coach. And by the way, he absolutely should get a head coaching job soon. I think he's been fantastic. All the players have raved about him. I think he knows what he's doing. I would love to see him. I don't think it's going to happen with the Patriots just because Bill is there. But I'm excited to see what Gerard Mayo eventually does when he gets his head coaching chance. If you can make him DC, if you could pay him a little more money, maybe you keep him a little longer because he's not, then taking a defensive coordinator job as a lateral move for him elsewhere. He has to get a head coaching job to leave. If he stays as the linebackers coach, I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would like to have him as their defensive coordinator. I'm frankly surprised he's still here. I don't know. I didn't think he was going to get the Eagles job, but he had some defensive coordinator interviews. I think Houston was one of them. I thought he was going to end up elsewhere. So that's where, Steve is what Steve is. He's the de facto defensive coordinator, even if he doesn't have the title. I don't think his status is changing anytime soon. Whereas I think there's maybe a way to keep Gerard Mayo around a little longer if you promote him. I just don't know if Bill's going to do that with Steve calling the plays.
Yeah, so I actually love watching Gerard Mayo coach at these practices because he is loud, hands-on. Like he's basically out there with the defense playing inside linebacker. Right.
Sometimes it's very easy to tell when a coach is a former player. He's one of those coaches where you can tell like he's back in that player. He's coaching, but he's back in that player mindset.
Yeah, and there's definitely some kind of group think here, right? Where Gerard Mayo's handling a lot of the front seven responsibilities, a lot of the blitz calls, a lot of the substitution stuff. A lot of that is still coming from Gerard Mayo as well. So there's a lot of kind of help that Steve Belichick gets from Gerard Mayo, I would say, in a lot of these situations. Now, I definitely think that there's a conversation to be had if you're Gerard Mayo moving on from the Patriots. As much as this is the team that made him, this is the team that drafted him, this is the team that he played for his entire professional career, and now he's coaching for. Going elsewhere is definitely the easiest way that he gets more credibility, more notoriety, and hopefully eventually lands that head coaching job that he seems to covet. So if I'm Gerard Mayo, I definitely see the writing on the wall that Steve Belichick is going to be here, that Bill's grooming Steve. Bill's obviously Steve Bill's son. So I think it's going to be tough for him to move up the ladder here in New England. So as we've been saying for a long time, Gerard Mayo, whether it's a defensive coordinator job elsewhere, or if he skips that and goes right to the head coaching ranks, eventually he's going to have to move on, right? Because it just doesn't feel like there's a future of him moving up the ladder here. But I think Gerard Mayo is a fantastic coach, and I really think that he's going to be a very good coach moving forward. And he's just somebody that gets it from the player perspective, but you can still tell he's tough on his players. He's hard on his players. He doesn't let guys get away with stuff either. And every single time you see a guy make a mistake, he coaches it up, but then he wants to run it back and make sure that the guy gets it right again the second time and doesn't let him off the hook for getting it wrong. So like I said, it's like he stands there in the middle of the drill sometimes like he's playing, right? Like he's out there and he's trying to think of what everybody should be doing. So I think Gerard Mayo is a fantastic coach, and I hope the Patriots find a way to keep him happy in a way, right? Like just to be able to keep him around and make sure that he's not somebody that has to leave because of the situation with Steve.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're heading towards. But yeah, I agree with what you said. I got nothing more to add. I agree with what you said.
No, I know. I'm just looking for some more questions.
So I got a question. Here. I have a question.
Okay.
So this is from Teron Davenport. He covers the Titans for ESPN.
Okay.
Jordan Matthews has put on 30 pounds and wants to transition to tight end, wants to sign somewhere as a tight end. Here's my question. How the hell is Jordan Matthews only 28? Feels like he's been in the league for 10 years. I was floored when I saw that. That's my whole thing. I don't know if you have a take on either him changing positions or the fact that he's somehow only 28 years old. But yeah, that's the thing.
It's interesting because, well, it's interesting for two reasons. And one, we can sort of lead into one of these questions. The first one is that everybody always has this conversation of just these bigger receivers that don't run really crisp routes, that don't have great footwork, that don't have good speed, I'll just add 20 pounds and play tight end, right? That's always like the default for N'Keal Harry. That's always the default, right?
Right.
Oh, will he be a really good tight end? So maybe Jordan Matthews, if he has any sort of semblance of success with this, can transition that groupthink into thinking, oh, wait a second, maybe this does actually work for some of these bigger bodied receivers, a guy like a Kelvin Benjamin, for instance.
Kelvin Benjamin is trying this. He signed with the Giants, remember?
Right. So all these guys are starting
to get away from being a tight end, as Booger said.
So I'll pull up the question now about N'Keal Harry. N'Keal Harry has gone the opposite direction, right? N'Keal Harry, for the last 2 off seasons, really has tried to slim down and tried to get into that 210 range to be faster, more explosive, so he can continue to be a wide receiver. A lot of people thought, oh, maybe he'd go the other direction like Kelvin Benjamin and Jordan Matthews have and bulk up and try to be a kind of move or, side of off the line tight end, right? Somebody that's kind of like a joker that moves around the formation and plays inside the slot, kind of detached from the formation, a little bit more like a Travis Kelce type of tight end than a Rob Gronkowski type of tight end, right? That's kind of like just a jumbo wide receiver. So is that the best approach for N'Keal Harry? Because right now, the question here is just where does he stand on the depth chart post OTAs? I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to tell where exactly he'd be on the depth chart, but it's pretty clear that I think he's the 4th guy at the very least, right? I mean, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers are your top 3. I think N'Keal's number 4 at best.
Well, I would say, we can tweak this a little bit. Instead of depth chart, if you talk about, odds to make the team, if you want to rank receivers by odds to make the team, he's 5th because those 3 guys you just mentioned, and then Gunnar might not be ahead of him on a hypothetical wide receiver depth chart, but I think there's a better chance Gunnar makes the team than he does because he's an all-pro punt returner.
Right. So it's a hard situation if you're N'Keal Harry, because you look at what the Patriots have done this offseason. They go out and they sign Hunter Henry. They sign Jonnu Smith. They draft 2 tight ends last year. So the tight end route is kind of off the table almost if you're N'Keal Harry, right? And the only way to stick around and be successful on this team right now feels like if he becomes an X receiver on the outside of the formation and becomes that missing piece that the Patriots don't necessarily have out there. And that's sort of been what we've talked about all offseason, especially around like the Julio Jones stuff and even a little bit with the draft, was they need that outside guy. Right. They have Nelson Aguilar who can stretch the field. They have these tight ends in the middle of the field, Bourne, Myers, more slot guys. But who's the guy that's just going to be one-on-one on the outside on the boundary with some size and speed? That has to be N'Keal Harry, or they have to get creative with it. And it's Aguilar playing a little bit out of position, or it's Hunter Henry playing as an X receiver, or Jonnu Smith playing as an X receiver. So N'Keal sees that opening and is trying to step into it. The question is he going to be able to do anything more than what he's done so far in his first couple of years in the league? So I don't know. I think that this is a interesting breakdown for Jordan Matthews, Kelvin Benjamin, guys like that have gone the other direction. I think N'Keal just saw the writing on the wall that he wasn't going to make it as a tight end, even if he went in that direction. And he had no real choice but to try to slim down, become more explosive, and play on the outside.
Yeah, it's tricky. And again, too, because I've talked about this, I don't know that what N'Keal's strengths are what the Patriots are looking for a wide receiver anymore. Right? They seem to have kind of gone away from that, and these smaller, quicker, not necessarily faster. Aguilar certainly has speed, but just like these more technician wide receivers, right?
A lot of the league has gone away from the size.
That's true. Yeah, it's not just them.
Besides like DK Metcalf, like there hasn't been a ton of guys that have been successful in that mold coming out of the draft in recent years, right? This goes back to a lot of the busts that we've seen throughout the years too. Not just, I'm not going to call N'Keal a bust, but guys that haven't been successful, Laquan Treadwells of the world, right? Like true busts at that position in the first round. A big reason why a lot of those guys have busted is because these size speed prospects that don't create any separation are going out of, they're no longer the it thing in the NFL. Right. It's no longer the it thing in the NFL to be somebody that's big and tall and explosive, but can't separate from anybody. The number one thing on everybody's draft board, scouting board, whatever you want to call it, for the wide receiver position is that magical word, separation. right? That's what everybody wants, is guys that get open and guys that separate. So the N'Keal Harry types of the world are becoming lesser and less valuable. And you're seeing guys in drafts fall that have those types of skill sets. Like DK falls all the way to the end of the second round because he runs a terrible 3-cone time. And people are worried about his footwork and his ability to break in and out of a route and things like that. So it's definitely becoming a dinosaur, both in fact that they're huge, but also the fact that they are going extinct. There you go.
Come on now. Come on. You want to get to this your boy Johnny C question here? This is an interesting one.
Oh, okay. There we go.
So, I mean, we could bring it back to what we were talking before, but I think cornerback. I think, they had Dre Kirkpatrick in for a meeting. I thought that he was a guy that would have been a fit. We've briefly touched on Richard Sherman on this show. There's some other guys who are out there. Certainly, there's some cornerback talent available. And the roster's full right now at 90 guys, although Patrick Chung's retirement, for some reason, is still not official. And there was a reason for that until June 1st. There's no reason for it at this point. So I guess we wait and see.
Maybe they're trying to convince him to come back. I'm just making that up.
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, I've had that thought. I'm not going to lie. I've had that thought, or maybe he's thinking about coming back and he told them, hey, wait on this. But I think it's got to be cornerback. If not, I think maybe a running back, maybe another pass catching back. I think Duke Johnson's still unsigned. Somebody brought up Todd Gurley much earlier in the chat. If they can get him on short money, I mean, I think he'd be a fantastic addition. Duke Johnson is still unsigned. Yeah. So those are two I'm looking at, cornerback and running back, if they're going to bring somebody in at this point and pay them, not significant money, but not some, never played in the NFL minimum contract, $500,000 guy.
Right. Corner, I totally agree with. Running back, we talked about this last week. We both, I think, had 6 running backs already on our 53-man.
That is true.
I just don't know if there's a spot for another running back. I know Bill's obsessed with running backs. He loves his running backs. Like he loves having that Jeremy Hill too, right, in camp, like that veteran that maybe is a few years removed from having a good season, but they feel like maybe has a little bit more juice left. A guy like a Todd Gurley definitely qualifies in that sort of bucket,
so
right?
Maybe this would be like a 2-part thing. Maybe if either they don't believe in JJ Taylor or if they end up moving Sony Michel because he's on the last year of his deal, then I could then you look at them bringing a running back. But I still think corner is the answer to this question.
So the other one that I would just quickly point out, and one of the reasons why I think he's so valuable to the team is because he can play guard and tackle, and that's Michael Onwenu. But what do they do at tackle behind Brown and behind Wynn? We're assuming they're just going to kick Onwenu back outside, and if it's Wynn that gets hurt, then Trent Brown flips over to the left side. Onwenu plays the right side. They put Ted Karras in the starting lineup, and everything, the train keeps rolling, right? But behind that, I mean, do they trust Justin Herron? Do they think Corey Cunningham or Will Sherman or any of these other guys can step up as sort of that 4th tackle, right? Because both Trent Brown and Isaiah Wynn have a bit of an injury history, especially Wynn. So at some point in time, there could be an instance where both of those guys are hurt. I'm not saying, I hope it doesn't happen. Maybe it doesn't happen that both guys are hurt.
For it, though.
Right, exactly. So at what point in time do we look at the tackle position? Because it's the same thing as corner, right? They have potential long-term need there. They didn't draft one this year until the 6th round, if you want to count Will Sherman as a tackle. Do they look at that spot and say, we need another veteran, just a guy that has some experience? Because Corey Cunningham has been on the roster for 2 years now or something like that, but they never actually trusted him to play in a game other than when they were desperate and absolutely needed him to play in a game. He's never actually been trusted by the coaching staff, I don't think, based off of what they're seeing at practice. So a 4th tackle a veteran guy, somebody that's been around the block, that's taken snaps in the NFL and started games in the NFL at tackle, I think would at least be interesting to get a guy like that in camp. I know he retired before and then unretired, but like a Jared Veldheer, right? Like someone like that's just like, hopefully doesn't retire on the Patriots, but someone that is like that can sort of be someone who's serviceable. I know everybody around here hates Marshall Newhouse, but he's as a 4th or a 5th guy. That's sort of what we're talking about.
Well, so this list is as of 2 days ago. I apologize if I'm missing anybody who signed the last couple of days. Morgan Moses, Russell Okung, Rick Wagner, DeMar Dotson. Again, if any of these guys, because I think some of these
DeMar
guys
Dotson's played some good football in the past. He's old. I want to say he's like 36 or something like that.
You said a veteran. I mean, I think if you're going with the young guy, Heron showed me enough last year.
Yeah.
I trust him in that role. So
all right, I'll agree with you there. Like, okay. I think I trust Justin Heron enough there to be the fourth tackle. Like, obviously on when is the first guy up to go outside and play tackle. If he's going to be, because Brown and Wynn got hurt and they have to throw somebody in there, then sure. I don't know. The tackle position is one position where we saw it with Marshall Newhouse, right? When you have a weak spot at one of the tackle spots, it brings down the whole offensive line, right? The whole offense. Yeah. The whole thing can kind of crater. So you definitely want to have as much depth there as possible. And I don't know how much they really do have there unless they truly, really trust a guy like Justin Heron. All right.
Yep. Real quick, I would add deep safety too. If they could add another deep safety, I think maybe it could be Colbert. I like him, but not necessarily another box safety, but specifically a guy who you can throw on the back end like a Duron Harmon and play next to Devin McCourty.
Duron Harmon he got released right by the Detroit Lions and then signed by the Falcons. Is he a free agent?
I mean, if they could straight up sign Duron Harmon.
He signed with Atlanta. I actually looked at this a couple weeks ago because I was really surprised when he became a free agent that they didn't kick the tires and give him. They didn't. I was told that they never even called Duron Harmon and made him an offer. So they like somebody in that role that we're not. I think it is. My theory's always been Duggar, that they're going to play Duggar a little bit more on the back end.
I mean, who else
maybe
would
it's
it be?
Jalen Mills. Maybe that's the guy that they think can play back there.
Maybe Miles Bryant.
Right. Maybe somebody like Miles Bryant. I don't know. But they feel like their Duron Harmon days are type of guy are over. At least for Duron
Shows
Harmon.
what I know.
Yeah, my lighters
pounding the table for 2 years that they didn't replace the guy.
I know. I mean, I definitely think they feel like they need to replace that skill set, but I think they already feel like they have.
You think they have the guy in house? Okay. Oh, interesting. We'll see.
Let's talk about Damian Harris because I think the sky's the limit for Damian Harris, especially with this offensive line, and I'm really excited to see what he can do. Minicamp is not the time to evaluate running backs, right? Nope. We're not hitting anybody. We're not really blocking anybody. It's not the time for that. But he is someone that internally has gotten a lot of buzz for the work that he's put in this offseason. Bill Belichick was very high on the things that when he was asked about Damian Harris during minicamp, he said, Damian Harris put in a ton of work behind the scenes. He's in great shape. He looks great. First of all, I think the biggest question is can Damian Harris be so good that he makes a guy like Sony Michel completely expendable to the team, right? And is he going to be the clear-cut RB1, right? Because the Patriots don't usually do that. Unless they have a true stud at that position, Corey Dillon. I guess they kind of considered LeGarrette Blount there for 2014 and for a stretch of time, like their RB1, at least a lead early down back. Is Damian Harris the lead early down back, clear cut, where he's not in a timeshare with Sony Michel, right? He's getting 90% of the carries.
Yeah, I mean, I think he can be good enough to get to that point. I don't think he'll do it. And this sounds kind of heartless, but it's a business. They have Damian Harris under contract for 2 more years after this year, right?
Yeah.
Michelle, this is it. And I don't think they're going to risk, as good as Damian Harris gets, I don't think that they're necessarily going to risk ruining their investment for those last 2 years and running him into the ground when they have Sony, who isn't, again, I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this without sounding like an a-hole, but Sony Michel, who isn't their problem after this year, who's likely going to go in free agency, and whatever wear and tear he picks up this season, it's going to be a new team's problem. So I think Damian Harris is going to be a really, really good player. I just think they're going to want to balance the running backs to keep everybody as healthy as possible, keep everybody fresh. And what you'll more so see, I think the way they award running backs, and this is kind of what they did with LeGarrette Blount, it's not so much about the number of snaps. It's a quality over quantity thing. It's not necessarily about the number of snaps. It's what kind of snaps is that player getting. You're going to see, like last year, right, when they were both healthy, which wasn't a ton, but they split the key snaps pretty evenly between Harris and Sony Michel. What I think you'll see is when it's, when they need, 3rd and 2, they need a first down. first and 10 and the offense has been stalling and they need a drive starter, they need a spark plug, I think what you'll do is you'll see Damien Harris in that spot more often than not. That's how you know they like the guy. It's the quality of the snaps they're giving him, because the numbers, I think Damien Harris, if he gets 40% of the snaps this year, I think that's a really good number. 40%. I think anything above that, well, it may be warranted based on the way he's playing, is unrealistic just based on how they've done things historically. And that's nothing against Harris. It's nothing against Michelle. It's nothing against the team. I actually think it's the best way to do it. I think giving a running back any more than 40% of your carries is kind of asinine, because if they're that good, you're just running them into the ground and shortening their career and asking for them to get hurt. I think it's the right way to do it. But I don't see them. So like that being said, I don't see them just grinding Damien Harris this year.
Yeah, this usually happens with first-round running backs, and I'm not saying this is going to happen with Damien Harris, but to your point about running guys into the ground, I think to a degree, and he's still a good running back, but maybe not where he was a year or two ago. Zeke Elliott had this problem, right? You draft a guy 4th overall. Todd Gurley certainly had this problem.
Todd Gurley's the perfect example. He was NFL Offensive Player of the Rookie of the Year in 15, Player of the Year in 17. The guy's only 26 years old and he can't get a job. Why? Because he already has, let me have it here in front of me so I can give you an actual number, because he has 1,400, almost 1,500 carries to his name at the age of 26. That's insane. That's just not sustainable. That's not how you build a long career. Not everybody's Frank Gore. I think the Patriots are aware of that, and they're going to be careful with Damien Harris and make sure, you'd rather get, a good amount out of him over a long period of time than a great amount out of him over a short period of time.
Exactly. And this is exactly what happens with those picks, because those guys come in and they're such highly touted draft picks that the team feels like they need to feature them, right? They need to feed those guys. They need to give them the ball because we just invested a top 10 pick in Saquon Barkley. So we're obviously going to have him touch the ball 400 times. With Damien Harris, what I'm fascinated to see is, let's say they're in it late in the season, they're actually in the playoff hunt, they're in the mix, maybe they're going to the postseason. Do they turn the keys over to Damien Harris from week 12 on? Right? Do they kind of make it a timeshare early on in the season, let Sony Michel get his carries? Maybe they let JJ Taylor get some carries or get some run in there as well. But when push comes to shove and the cards are down and it's wild card weekend, or it's a win or go home week 17 game or something like that, I think that's the time where I want to really see, are they going to run Damien Harris 30 times? Right? Is that the time he can go out there and shine?
I guess that's what I'm saying. So and again, this isn't necessarily the scenario, but let's put this hypothetical out there that Damien Harris just proves to be such a better back and he's the clear number one, right? And you look at the last couple of weeks of the season, and let's say they need all these games. Week 16 against Buffalo, heavy Damien Harris. Week 17 against Jacksonville, it may be something where in that game, even though it's a big game in itself, because Jacksonville's not as good of a team, maybe that's a Sony heavy game just to give Damien Harris a week off and let him rest. And then you go back to him week 18 against Miami, right, which would be a big game and probably a better opponent. So, again, I think I hate to say this, I think it's almost kind of a load management thing like the Celtics. It
totally is.
It's not about just give him all the carries. It's about pick your spots, where you're getting the most bang for your buck, and you just sort of expand that a little bit based on how well he's running.
Right, because Corey Dillon and LeGarrette Blount were at different stages of their careers than Damien Harris is right now. Corey Dillon was at the end of his career, and they threw him in there, and they let him do whatever he wanted, right? They knew he was the big free agent signing, and they let him do whatever he wants. It's a totally different situation with Damien Harris on his rookie contract, hopefully with another contract coming maybe from the Patriots on the second contract. So I think we're on the same page with this one, that he's probably not going to run Damien Harris into the ground, right? It's probably going to be a lot more of a planned approach than that. All right, let's move back over to the defensive side of the football and talk about a guy that's totally at the end of the roster, but definitely right on the roster bubble. Like Byron Cowart right now is the definition of the roster bubble, I feel like, for the Patriots. They have 5 defensive linemen that I think are locks to make the roster, in Lawrence Guy, Devon Gauchaw, Dietrich Wise, Henry Anderson, and obviously Christian Barmore. So do they carry a 6th guy and get Byron Cowart on there? Is Byron Cowart even the 6th guy if it comes down to that? Where does Byron Cowart's future with the team look like? Because Bill Belichick's called him one of the most explosive players on the team, like multiple times in the past couple of seasons. He said that he's a very good athlete. We know that he can really come off the ball and is a very strong player at the point of attack, but there seems to be a lot of guys that they want to work in. Like I just mentioned, those top 5 guys. So where do we get in with Byron Cowart? You know, where does he fit in? Is he going to be on this team? All that type of stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, just him not being at minicamp, like maybe he's a Foxborough flu guy. It's very, very early to say that, but I'll just throw that out there. Byron Cowart is one of the most interesting draft picks the Patriots have made in the last 5 years because he was the number 1 recruit in high school in his class going to college. And he did it as a stand-up edge rush. I mean, he was like a 350-pound guy on 2 feet coming flying around the edge. And then when he got to Auburn, for whatever reason, they had him put on like 40 pounds to try to turn him into a defensive tackle. And it killed, like, he was a good player still, but it just killed what he did best. He ended up transferring out. He later said going to Auburn was a mistake. He went for the wrong reasons. And he's kind of like caught in between, right? He's built like a defensive tackle, but he wants to play almost like an outside linebacker. And when the Patriots drafted him, that was the question. It was, would you have him put the weight on and shore up his technique and just have him become a defensive tackle? Or do you have him take the weight back off and see if you can tap into the player he was in high school? I think that they've kind of gone with that first one. I think they want to turn him into Adam Butler. And if there's a guy you can turn into that pass rush defensive tackle, I mean, that's sort of the background, right? He learned how to be a pass rusher and then he put on the size after. So I think they'd love to have somebody in that role. If they're not super confident in Christian Barmore, he's probably the next best option on the roster for that role right now. So I certainly think there's a path, but it comes down to, and we talked about it last week, I can give you a path to the roster for about 70 players.
Right.
There's a bunch of guys here who will all help this team one way or the other. You can't keep all of them. Do you want to keep, it comes down to, do you want to keep your second pass rush tackle in Byron Cowart? Or do you want to keep a second sideline to sideline middle linebacker in Terez Hall? Like they're both good options. There's an argument to be made for keeping each of them. It's just a matter of what do you prefer? What does the rest of the team look like? So yeah, like you said, Evan, this is a long way of just agreeing with what you said. He's as bubble as possible. It's going to come down to what other players look like. I think unless he's just gangbusters, I think it's going to come down to what other players look like to decide if he makes the team or not.
I think the Christian Barmore conversation is exactly what this is all about with Byron Cowart, right? Is Christian Barmore ready to play a role of some sort as a rookie, or are they really going to have to ease him in? Based off of what we saw in minicamp, and granted it's practices without pads, all those kind of caveats, right, that we can put on minicamp stuff. Christian Barmore looked really good. He looked really good, specifically as an interior pass rusher. He did not look like a rookie rushing the passer. I think he actually was probably their best pass rushing defensive lineman out at minicamp. You saw, and we're talking about D linemen, so I'm not talking about the Uches and the Hightowers and the Judons and the Van Noys. I'm talking about hand in the dirt, interior defensive lineman. He was very, very effective pushing the pocket, rushing up the middle and that spot. So maybe they do feel like they don't want to throw him all the way into the fire, but I think it's going to be very difficult if Christian Barmore can handle it mentally in terms of learning the playbook and learning all the techniques and terminology and different calls and stuff like that. It's going to be hard to keep a guy that talented off the field when the Patriots aren't exactly, it's not like they're lining up like Aaron Donald and JJ Watt and all these guys on the defensive line, right? So I feel like they want Barmore. Similarly, I think with both their top draft picks, like with Mac Jones too, they want those guys to take the jobs, right? They want those guys to step in and take those jobs right away. It'll be up to Barmore, I think, a lot of the case with Byron Cowart. And I also would say, and this is something that we might not be able to know as well as the coaches would know, obviously, is how much 4 down do they actually want to play? And do they want to have that in their back pocket, right? Or do they want to truly just be a 3 down or less type of team? Because if they don't want to play much 4 down, then I don't think they need a big body necessarily on the defensive line. But if they want to be able to get into some 4 down stuff, which I thought was a little bit of an issue last year at times when they went up against some of those heavy outside zone type of teams like the McVay, Shanahan offense, when they went up against those guys, they really didn't have the depth on the defensive line to go 4 down. And I thought that kind of cost them a little bit. So even a couple years ago when they played the Titans in that wild card round in Brady's last season, they didn't have the depth to go 4 down against Tennessee and Derrick Henry. So they were undersized against some of those big time run teams. So maybe they do feel like they want a 6th guy to be able to rotate in so they can go with 4 down line. But if they don't, and they want to truly just be an odd front team or a 2 down team, or even sometimes we've seen them just run with 1 down defensive lineman in some packages, then maybe they can get away with only 5 guys and save that roster spot, like you said, for somebody like a Terez Hall or someone like that in another position on the roster.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's all going to be so intertwined this year, I think. And it's, and it's going to be frustrating because people are going to ask us, what about this position? What about that position? And, I think at wide receiver, tight end, and running back, it's all going to be intertwined. Defensive line, linebackers going to be intertwined, corner and safety. And there's normally a little bit of this, right? But I think this year more than any other, the roster projections from person to person are really going to vary because the positions aren't as clearly defined as they normally are.
So let's end this here on wide receivers. Maybe we'll get 2 more questions in there. But first and foremost, with the wide receivers, they're talking about Trey Nixon here in the chat. Some questions about Marvin Hall as well. We talked about Zuber quite a bit, but out of that, Zuber, Trey Nixon, Marvin Hall, Devin Ross, Christian Wilkerson. These are the guys that I have right now as cuts. That's 6 guys I mentioned right there. Who do you feel like, Alex, out of that entire group? And let's take Zuber out of it, I guess, maybe, because I think he's – I don't know.
So they're keeping 6 receivers now?
If they keep 6 receivers, right? And then the obvious answer, the guy that makes the team, I feel like is Zuber, right? Like I feel like that's the easy one. So I don't know. Do you think that any of those other guys have even a shot? Do you think Trey Nixon, I do think, has a shot because
I think, they
drafted him for a reason, but even if it's the 7th round, but a guy like Marvin Hall, Trey Nixon, these types of guys, like, do any of these guys excite you at all?
Trey Nixon excites me, but he's a guy who needs a year. If they can bury him on IR, get him on the practice squad, whatever, I just think he needs a year around the team to really tap in his potential. If he plays this year, he plays this year. I don't think it would be bad, but I think he's more of a long-term project. Marvin Hall's fast, I guess. Not I guess. I mean, he's fast. I don't know that he's what they're looking for. Who are the other ones? Doug Kyde did some research about Christian Wilkinson and his time in college and his time with Tennessee last year and raved about him. And supposedly he was great last year on the practice squad. So I guess don't sleep on him. And I really think Devin Ross made a run at the roster last year. He really did. And obviously it wasn't, the greatest wide receiver group of all time. It wasn't the dream team of wide receivers, but he made a push, and you have to wonder if there were preseason games, if he would have kind of gotten over the hump, because he seems like the kind of guy who would really benefit from in-game action. So I won't count Devin Ross out. I think after what he did last year and even 2 years ago, he was good too. He's a guy who always seems to kind of hang around, and you can't write him off as an automatic cut. You always have to at least think about him during the roster cuts. So no, I wouldn't write Devin Ross off. I wouldn't write Trey Nixon off. But I still think right now, the way those guys are going to get their chances on special teams, because the reason I have Isaiah Zuber as my 5th receiver right now isn't just what he does on offense in his versatility offensively, because he is versatile on the offensive side of the ball with some of these gadget plays. It's what he does as a kick returner. He's an All-American, and that's why I think the Patriots were initially drawn to him. So, one of those guys, Nixon, Ross, even if it is Marvin Hall, they got to show me something as a kick returner as well as a receiver to get into that conversation with Isaiah Zuber.
Yeah, my light is like.
I see you're having a rave over there or something.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's plugged into like a USB outlet on my desk, so maybe it's the USB outlet. That's whatever. We'll figure these things out for the next show. I just don't want to shut it off and fix it now because I'm going to go completely dark if I do that. So we'll figure it out for the next show. But let's talk about these wide receivers here for a second. Trey Nixon, I wrote about him. I spoke to his wide receivers coach down there at UCF. I think he's a Patriot type of guy. I think he's got better route running skills than what he was able to show in that offense. He's got good vertical speed, as we know. But when I saw him out there at minicamp, he doesn't quite have an impressive NFL body there, right? He does look a little bit slim. I do think he's going to, like you said, would benefit from sort of a year on IR, maybe a year on the practice squad, get him in the weight room, get him on an NFL strength and conditioning program. Those types of things I think Trey Nixon is going to need to be able to shine. You mentioned Christian Wilkerson. He's someone that looks quick underneath the defense. I think he can get open out of the slot, inside the formation, things like that. I wasn't overly impressed with him, though. But Devin Ross, I've been a Devin Ross guy since last training camp. He is somebody that I think does a lot of Patriot-like things very, very well. Can play inside, can play outside, runs really smooth routes, has a little bit of juice to him. This light is just driving me nuts, so I'm going to shut it off for the rest of the show. It's all right. I'm not that dark. And I think that is someone that with preseason games, like you said, has the potential to maybe stand out a little bit more, so that you guys and everybody else can see a player like that. He is someone that every single time we see him out on the practice field, he's making plays. Even last week where he was on sort of like a tryout basis with the team, he was making plays, and he had a couple big catches on Wednesday on day 3 of a mini camp. And I don't know. I've always really liked Devin Ross. I think he's got a little bit of juice to him. I think he's got some route running ability. He's someone that I wonder, is there an NFL gig for him, whether it's with the Patriots or somebody else?
And I believe there is. He's only 25 too, as much as it feels like, he's kind of hung around here for a little bit and he seems to be in and out of camps. He's only 25. I think he could eventually find a way. And like you said, maybe it's not New England, but you know, teams need depth wide receivers. I think he's a good depth option. I think he ends up somewhere.
So I think I confirmed that it's the USB port that I had it plugged into. So now I have it plugged into my computer. Good job, Sherlock. And it seems to be working just fine. So these are the things that we have to go through just to have some light on us for these shows. All right, let me scroll through these questions, Alex, and see if there's any one that stand out that we haven't gotten to. But I think that was a pretty good run of questions. Let's end it on this one because
okay.
I want to end it on this one, and then we can do it. We can do your Madden Minute or whatever you were.
I was going to say if you want to do a Boston Sports Minute, but
we can do a Boston Sports Minute.
We probably do, yeah.
Gunner, your boy Gunner, is Gunner going to get some run at wide receiver this year? Is he going to take that Edelman, Welker, Troy Brown sort of path, trajectory, whatever you want to call it, from ace punt returner, all-pro punt returner, to eventually having a role on offense and contributing as a wide receiver?
I think he does eventually. I don't know if this year's the year. And it's nothing against Gunner. I think with the 2 tight end set, there's just less wide receiver snaps, right? You're going to have 2 wide receivers on the field most of the time. Aguilar, Bourne, and Myers are going to get your top 3 snap counts. So even if Gunner's the 4th guy, even if they let Harry go and Gunner's the 4th guy, and then it's just Zuber, who's kind of a gadget player, that's still probably, 20% of the offensive snaps, and that feels high. So I think he gets more than he did last year, and he looks like he's still improving. He's still growing. He had a strong camp. So I'm not totally writing Gunner off as a wide receiver, but I just, if you're what was it, 2013, where Edelman popped on the scene and went from like 16 catches to 87 catches, right?
I think something like that.
Yeah. This isn't his 2013. This isn't Gunner's 2013. This isn't his year where he arrives like Edelman did the season after Welker left. Pending injuries. If there's injuries, it could happen. But the way the depth chart looks right now, I don't know if the snaps are there for him to make that jump this year. Next year is the year I'm looking at.
I guess maybe you could say that Jacoby Myers has some of this skill set, but if it's like 3rd and 4 and they just want to hit one of those quick juke routes or something like that, like I still think Gunner's the best at that, or close to the best at that on the team. I don't know if anybody matches quite his short area agility. And the one thing that we saw in the punt returns is that he's clearly an NFL athlete, right? Like, and I know you're loving this, Alex, because I thought Gunnar Olszewski, I'll be honest, I thought Gunnar Olszewski was a sack of potatoes when
you
they
said
you didn't signed him, right?
You didn't think he was going to get cut at the end of camp. You thought he was going to get cut during camp.
I thought that he was absolutely a waste of time.
Because
No
you
doubt
don't
about
watch.
it.
You just made your mind up. I told you. I was like, here's the clips. Go watch the kid. You're like, I don't need to watch. I
And
know
I
what he
was
is.
110% wrong about Gunner. So now I'm going to go the other direction and hype him up because I feel like I owe it to him, right? And also because I feel like he's getting a lot better. So to me, I feel like a guy like Gunner, this is the year, right? Year 3, year 4, he transitions a college cornerback, right? And now he's a wide receiver. It takes a couple years to learn the new position. You saw last year that he is an NFL athlete, that he has NFL speed, NFL explosiveness with the ball in his hands. So all he had to do was train his body to learn the techniques of running routes and getting open as a wide receiver. We know he's got the speed. We know he's got the burst. He just needs to be able to now corral that into running routes. So if he can translate that into running routes, then I'm not going to say he's going to be an all-pro receiver like he is a punt returner, but is there sort of like a Danny Amendola future for him, right? Where he's like a good slot receiver, not a great slot receiver. And I guess Amendola is a bad example because of all the big playoff moments, but you know what I'm trying to get at. Like a player at that level combined with the punt return skills.
Well, I think here's where the Edelman comp comes in handy. Is he going to be a borderline Hall of Famer Gunner? I don't know. But where it's helpful is early in the career because like Gunner, Edelman changed positions. He came from a smaller school and he changed positions to wide receiver when he got to New England. So I was kind of guessing with this before I pulled it up. Julian Edelman was drafted in 2009 at the age of 23. His catches by a year, 37, 7, 4, 21, 10, then 105 in 2013 was his breakout season.
So it was that 5th year technically, but the rookie year was pretty solid too, though.
37 for 359, I guess. Yeah, but it was the 5th year where he really broke out, right?
Right.
At the age of 27. So for the record, Gunner's going into his 3rd year. He's at the age of 24. So he doesn't, if you follow the Edelman plan, and no two players are the same, but if you follow the Edelman plan, the Edelman timeline, he's still got a couple of years before he really breaks out.
Okay, so I will get to the Boston Sportsman in a second, but I really like this question too. Yeah. I hate pitting guys on the team against each other, but just for argument's sake, we are in the middle of June, so we have nothing else to freaking talk about. Uche or Duggar, who has a higher ceiling, more upside, whatever cliche you want to use?
So I think, as a football player, if we were just doing rate this guy on a scale of 1 to 100 of how good he is at football, I think it's Josh Uche. But we've seen this before time and time again where pass rushers maybe don't hit their potential in New England because of their scheme. Chandler Jones being the prime example of that. Good player here, but had to go to Arizona to truly tap into what he could do. So that being said, I think Kyle Duggar, and then it's the opposite with defensive backs in New England. They get the most out of these guys. Defensive backs come to New England and they just shine like they can't anywhere else. So that's not to say I think Duggar's a bad player. I think Uche has higher NFL upside, but I think Duggar in the Patriots system is just such a perfect fit. I think they're going to get the most out of him. I think he's also more likely to get a second contract in New England. So, if you're asking this in terms of whose jersey should I buy, it's Duggar. If you're asking this in terms of who's going to have a higher Madden rating in 6 years, it's Josh Uche. Okay,
so the way I look at this is both are uber talented and fantastic athletes.
And yeah, by the way, both of them crazy high upside. It sucks we got to compare them because both of them are total finds.
Along with Christian Barmore. So this is a really good young nucleus to have if you're the Patriots. I think Barmore, Duggar, Uche is as good as it gets across the league just for young defensive talent on your team. Now, I think what it's going to ultimately come down to, and what it often does, is both these guys are super athletes, very, very talented, explosive, hard-hitting, quick off the ball type of players, but which one has better feel and instincts for the game, right? I think that's going to be sort of the difference maker, is which guy has a higher IQ, which guy has better field instincts, awareness, that kind of stuff. And that's where I do think Duggar might eventually edge out Uche, which is why I think maybe he has a little bit of a higher ceiling. Is the way that I look at Duggar, especially in college, but even with the Patriots last year, is a guy that already was wearing multiple hats, already was around the ball a lot, already was making on-ball production with tackles and things like that against the run. I feel like he has a lot of football instincts, and I think he's going to be around the football a ton. So maybe Uche is going to be more disruptive in the short term. Maybe Uche has a little bit more production in terms of quarterback pressures or sacks or something like that. But I think Duggar is going to be around the football a ton. And I really hope, I've been saying it all offseason, they mentioned Rodney Harrison, and I got super excited that the Patriots are thinking more Rodney Harrison kind of mold than Patrick Chung mold with Kyle Duggar, right? I want to see Kyle Duggar roaming. I want to see him free to do whatever he wants and kind of feel things out and anticipate and go after the football. I think that's going to be a whole lot of, both these guys are going to be studs for the Patriots. It's a great question, because it's great that they're both on the Patriots roster, along with Barmore, who I mentioned as well. I think all three of those guys, and I think eventually Ronnie Perkins might be in this conversation too, as well, as sort of that young nucleus of Patriots talent. They got J.C. Jackson, who's relatively young, to play the back end as well on the outside. For outside corners, Miles Bryant, I think, is going to be around for a while too, as sort of that slot guy, next guy to Jonathan Jones eventually.
So you're that high on I thought I was high on Miles Bryant. You're very high on Miles Bryant.
I think that between...
I also don't know how you're... Go ahead.
I was going to say,
I don't know how you're listing all this young talent. You don't mention Cam McGrone.
McGrone too, yeah. I mean, it's hard. I forgot about McGrone because I keep on forgetting about him because he's probably not going to play this year, right? So I'm not thinking about him in terms of the 2021 team. But sure, Cam McGrone, Barmore, Perkins, Uche, Duggar, Miles Bryant, I think deserves to be in that conversation, as well as somebody that's going to contribute for a while for the Patriots. All those guys are, J.C. Jackson too, I think is still under the age of like 25, 26. I mean, all these players are under the age of 25, maybe, which is pretty crazy to think about.
J.C. Jackson turns 26 in November.
Okay, so they're all under the age of 26. We can cap it there. That's a very good nucleus to have under the age of 26. And if they can develop some of these guys, I think all of these guys, to me, maybe not, we can't go there yet with McGrone because we haven't even seen him even in non-padded practices. I think all those guys are going to be NFL starters. I think some of them have the potential to be even more than just an average NFL starter, and that's going to be really exciting. Do you want to do the Boston Sports Minute? We can talk about the Celtics a little bit, the Red Sox, if you want, but the Celtics right now, I feel like is the number one topic. I was listening to your station the other day, and 98.5 The Sports Hub, and that was what they were talking about pretty much the whole time, was the Celtics and all this Brad Stevens and Kemba Walker trades and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think with that trade, I get why they did it. I've been a big Kemba Walker fan since he was at UConn, so it sucks it didn't work out here. To me, that trade is the first in what should be a series of events. They don't all have to be trades, but a series of events. And Adam Himmelsbach had a report, and he reported a couple things from the trade that. This doesn't necessarily mean Tristan Thompson's time in Boston is done. They viewed Moses Brown more as a financial piece than a building block. I don't know how I feel about either of those. That they feel more likely to re-sign Evan Fournier. I kind of keep going back and forth on that. On one hand, it's like, well, you better get Evan Fournier back because you're thin at guard. But on the other hand, and I know there's a way to go, but they don't have a ton of assets to add players this year. They're in better shape long term, but this year right now, they're shaping up for their backcourt to be Marcus Smart and Evan Fournier. And I love Marcus Smart. I'm one of the few people left who really loves Marcus Smart, but I think he's best as a sixth man. I don't know about that as your starting backcourt, even with Tatum and Brown. And I'm just worried one more bad year, right? You got Jason Tatum going to the Olympics. He's going to get recruited heavily. I'm starting to worry about what his future is. So the Celtics are in an interesting place. I think the coaching hire is very important. I think it's very encouraging that they're letting Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Smart have a say. From Jared Weiss from The Athletic, and he had the great piece on everything that went on behind the scenes with Kemba, all of that. But I think that's important. It sounds like it's going to be Ime Udoka. I don't think he'd be a bad hire. I don't. I was a Sam Cassell guy. If it's Udoka, he was with the Nets. He knows how to win. He coached these guys in the World Cup. So if that's the hire, so be it. Those are kind of all my Celtics thoughts rolled into one.
So here's my thing about Marcus Smart real quick is I have a lot of reservations about Marcus Smart running the offense for the Celtics because he's just going to jack up shots that we don't want Marcus Smart jacking up. Like if Marcus Smart could come to terms with the fact that he's a great defender and a pretty good passer too on the offense side of the ball, I would say, and should only be shooting as a secondary option to Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown taking a shot, then I would be all for Marcus Smart as sort of the starting point guard and committing to him more than they've committed to him. But I see Jason Tatum and I see Jaylen Brown, and I've heard what other guys have written on the beat, guys like Jared Weiss and those people at Himmelsbach that are way more plugged in than either of us. They all say that like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown sort of like roll their eyes sometimes and like kind of like shrug their shoulders every single time Marcus Smart like jacks up another three, right? And I don't want that to happen to the Celtics. So I think that they have to go away from the Kyrie Kemba point guard. Like, I don't think that the point guard position with two wings as sort of like the leaders of your team, you need like a Patrick Beverley, right? Like you need like the defense, hard-nosed, good passer, like that type of player, like a 08 Rondo. Right? Like you need a distributor at that point guard position. I think Marcus Smart could be a really good one, but he has to be willing to commit to that role and not try to jack up all these shots that he does in every single game. My take on the coaching hire, I like Udoka. I've always been a big Sam Cassell proponent as well. This other guy, though, interests me. I'm trying to remember his first name, and I'm trying to look it up.
What's his last name?
Darvin Ham.
So
from Milwaukee.
I like Darvin Ham just because I think having Coach Ham would be cool, and I would love saying Coach Ham.
Oh my God! You got it.
Like, I'm not saying I don't mean to make fun of the guy, and like I do think he's a decent option, but also Coach Ham would be epic.
So Darvin Ham played in the NBA. He didn't have like the most decorated NBA career, but he did play in the NBA. He bounced around a little bit. He's been on Budenholzer's staff for a while now, which I think Budenholzer and Brad Stevens, I think, sort of overlap a little bit in terms of style and how they want to play and stuff like that as a team. So I think that he comes from a system that's a little bit similar. He's worked really closely, apparently, in Milwaukee with Giannis and has been a big part of Giannis's development. That sounds like a great guy to pair with Jason Tatum, and sort of they've been able in Milwaukee, which is obviously not LA, it's not Miami, it's not this like big time city in terms of sports. They've been able to keep Giannis happy. They've been able to develop Giannis into an MVP. To me, I think that's sort of a kind of under the radar one that I would really like to see. And I think that would work out really well for the Celtics as well. I don't mind Udoka either. I think any one of those three. The one guy that I think is I feel I don't know if I really want is Chauncey Billups. I don't know why either necessarily. I think maybe it's just the fact that he's like getting it just because he's a big name or something like that. You know what I mean? More so than like really proving his worth.
Well, so I think he has a similar background to Sam Cassell. The difference being Sam Cassell's been an assistant for 10 years. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I'm also not really into Rick Carlisle either. They need somebody new, somebody fresh. Rick Carlisle's old guard. The term retread gets thrown around. I know he's not really a retread because he was in one spot for so long, but I know you kind of said if I want to talk about the Red Sox, we do need to throw the Red Sox in here quick, Evan, because they are starting a huge series tonight, 3-game series against the Rays. They're half a game up on Tampa. Tampa's lost, I think, 4 in a row, 5 in a row. They have a chance to gain some ground here. If they take 2 or 3, suddenly they're 2.5 up. They're probably up on the division at the All-Star break. You also have Connor Wong just got called up, the second prospect or the second player from the Mookie Betts trade to reach the majors. Obviously, Verdugo's been there, so that's very exciting. And Chris Sale's going to start facing batters on Saturday. So feels like the Red Sox have a ton of momentum right now. This is, again, a huge, huge, huge series for them against the Rays. Buy in on them. They're the only team going right now. Now is a great time. If you've been kind of hesitant about the Red Sox this year, right now is the perfect time to jump on and kind of get into the groove of things. I've really enjoyed all the games of the Red Sox games I've watched this year. I think they're a fun team to watch. They're an exciting team to watch. They play with a lot of energy, a lot of passion. They have a good lineup, which is always fun. Not that this is like a hot take or like anything groundbreaking, but if this team can get Chris Sale back at any capacity, whether he's in the bullpen or as a starter or whatever they can get him back out there as, even if he's only going 5 innings, right? Like just having Chris Sale back with all of these, the progress that they've made as a team without Chris Sale, I think that this team has a chance to win it all. I really do. Right. Well, especially
75% Chris Sale, right? Like he's not going to be 100% probably this year, but
Sale now with some of these pitchers tailing off with the whole sticky substance investigation, like they need an injection, and the deadline's coming up too. I'm interested to see what they're going to do. You know, are they going to add a starting pitcher? Max Scherzer might be one of the top names. I'd give up a good amount to get Max Scherzer at this point if he's healthy.
Yeah.
I think I would. And then
I was out on that a few weeks ago when you suggested it, but now it does kind of feel like it's a pretty wide open baseball season, as you said. And I think that they could, if they might be a Max Scherzer away from winning the World Series.
So here's the deal with Scherzer, and he is coming back from an injury, so you have to see how he looks. You also don't know, give it a couple weeks with the new rules about substances. Max Scherzer at 36 and 13 starts has a 2.21 ERA, a whip of 0.8. 0.8 whip. So if you don't know, whip is walks and hits per innings pitched. He's allowing less than a runner per inning. He's having a career year at the age of 36. He's on the final year of his deal. The Red Sox right now, to me, they are probably about on par with the Rays and the White Sox. They're maybe a step behind the Astros in the American League. If they had Max Scherzer, they're the best team in the American League. And I don't know that they're better than the Dodgers. I don't know that they're better than the Padres, even with Max Scherzer. But the point is, if you get to that stage, if you get to that final round, anything can happen. So I would, a Max Scherzer or a Max Scherzer type, I would absolutely invest. I'm not giving up Jarren Duran. I'm not giving up Tristan Casas. I'm not giving up Brian Mata. I'm not giving up the other pitcher who was up at the beginning of the year, whose name I'm blanking on. Tanner Houck. And look, those are their 4 top prospects. No duh. If you can figure out a way, like maybe you move Bobby Dahlbeck, right? Maybe you move Michael Chavis.
For that one.
If you can figure out a way to make that happen and get a guy like that, there's a true path to the Red Sox having the best roster in the American League. Oh, and the MLB draft, by the way, they should absolutely take Kumar Rocker or Jack Leiter. I think that's enough baseball. But unless you have a thought on the draft.
Really quickly, because we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
How much are you paying Taylor Hall if you're the Bruins?
Oh, good question. Well, the good news is I don't think you need to pay him a ton. It sounds like he wants to be here. It sounds like he'll take a hometown discount. I'm not super familiar with the Bruins' financial structure and the NHL salary cap, so I can't give you a number. But, if you have to I'd probably make him the 4th highest paid player on the team, right? If you have Bergeron, Marchand, McAvoy, I think is a year away from a deal, but you kind of figure out what you're going to pay McAvoy. I'd pay him more than I'd maybe pay Rask, I think, at this point. And I know that's not exactly how it works. Like I'm very much generalizing here, but I'd make a significant effort to keep him. I would. I think he changed that third line or second line. You do need to figure out what's happening with David Krejci too. That plays into this, but he sounds like a guy who will take a hometown discount. So
I think Krejci will be back on the hometown discount, but even if he's not, and you have to move Charlie Coyle up to second line center, and you have Taylor Hall.
Coyle and Hall would be a fun line.
Yeah, I think that's really fun as well. So from what I've read on the Taylor Hall thing from people that know much more about hockey than I do, is that $5 to $6 million range per year is what we're talking about. And in hockey salaries, it's not like football where like the salary cap number is, it's literally the salary cap number is pretty much what they pay the guy. Right. So $5-6 million bucks. I think it might take a decent amount of years because Taylor Hall is still relatively young to keep him here. But if they can sign Taylor Hall for like 3 or 4 years at $6 million per, I'm definitely doing that.
Perfect. No, I would absolutely do that.
All right, so we're in on Taylor Hall. Are you as out on Tuukka Rask as the 2 to 6 show, or are you okay with him coming back?
I'm going to cop out. I don't know enough about the injury.
That's fair.
You're not going to have him to start the year. I think they said he's not coming back until January or February.
Right.
And we don't even know when the NHL season's starting. But let's say they go back to their traditional start right in mid-October. That's a lot of time without him. So it's, how much are you going to go with Swayman and
Vladar.
Dan Vladar, which Ty Anderson looked this up, would be their youngest goalkeeping duo in 15 years.
Right.
So,
because Euro Halak is done, right? So they have to get somebody.
Right. So it's, how much am I going to invest in that veteran goalie to buy time for Rask? And then how is that going to work with Swayman? So I need to know exactly how long he's going to be out, what the kind of surgery is. Like it's too early. I'd like to see him back. I'd like to see him end his career in Boston. I'm not out on him as a Bruin. I think it would be very cool if he retired here, but they need to do something different to start winning games. And if you can't have him until February and you have to pay starting caliber goalie money to somebody to buy those first 3 months until he gets back, at that point, what are you doing bringing him back? It has to be a very affordable contract.
Right. So I think Swayman can carry them, but I think they are going to have a new Euro Halak.
You need a veteran. Yeah, you can't be that young.
Right. So you need a new Euro lock to make sure that they can carry those months until Tuca comes back. And then you have the Swayman versus Tuca thing, which will be, great radio and podcasting fodder. But I think the Bruins are in a fascinating spot because from what the cap is, from what I looked up, they do have a little bit of wiggle room this year to make some things happen. Now they have some big free agents, right? Krejci, Rask, Taylor Hall, but they do have a little bit of wiggle room, so they can make some moves here this offseason to update the team and upgrade the team, I should say. But Alex and I are going to get back to football. We promise on Thursday.
This was good.
Thank you for humoring us with our Boston Sports 20 minutes that we are supposed to be. We call it the Boston Sports Minute. It always lasts longer than a minute by quite a bit. But we did a little bit of everything here tonight. We'll do the same thing on Thursday. We'll do about an hour of Patriots talk, give you our Boston Sports Minute update. Hopefully some Patriots news does come down this week, next week, somewhere. This is the dead period of the offseason. Right now is one of my favorite periods of the offseason, though, Alex, because we're going to get all of the offseason hype trainer videos and hype trainer footage. And I'll probably do some interviews with some trainers and stuff like that, where we talk about how good this player looks, best shape of his career, going to have a breakout season, all these types of things, which is always well and good.
You're going to do that. I'm going to Madden news starts coming out. That's where my focus is going to be. So if you like Madden, follow me on Twitter.
Okay, so Madden is Alex's territory. Come to me for the trainer stuff. We'll be back on Thursday night, though, with another Patriots beat. We're going to do some roster breakdown as well. Maybe we'll take some questions again, and we'll see you then. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday night.